share this Bhagavatam with all of you. So we will get right into it. I'll share my screen. We're reading today Canto 10, verse 3, chapter 3, verse 11. And so I'll read the Sanskrit and in the translation by Srila Prabhupada. We'll do some prayers. We'll get into the purports as such. So let's see if I don't butcher this Sanskrit. Please forgive me if I do. It says, Savismaya Savismayat Phula Vilochana Harim Sutam Vilokyana Kandundu Vistada Krishna Vatarotsava Sambramos Prishan Mudha Dvijebyo Yutam Apluto Gavam. And the verse reads, when Vasudeva saw his extraordinary son, his eyes were struck with wonder. In transcendental jubilation, he mentally collected 10,000 cows and distributed them among the Brahmanas as a transcendental festival. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Srila Prabhupada. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has analyzed the wonder of Vasudeva upon seeing his extraordinary child. Vasudeva was shivering with wonder to see a newborn child decorated so nicely with valuable garments and gems. He could immediately understand that the Supreme Personality of Godhead had appeared. Not as an ordinary child, but in his original, fully decorated four-handed form. The first wonder was that the Lord was not afraid to appear within the prison house of Kamsa, where Vasudeva and Devaki were interned. Second, although the Lord, the Supreme Transcendence, is all-pervading, he had appeared from the womb of Devaki. The third point of wonder, therefore, was that a child could take birth from the womb so nicely decorated. Fourth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead was Vasudeva's worshipable deity, yet had taken birth as his son. For all these reasons, Vasudeva was transcendentally jubilant, and he wanted to perform a festival as Kshatriyas do to celebrate the birth of a child. But because of his imprisonment, he was unable to do it externally, and therefore, he performed the festival within his mind. This was just as good. If one cannot externally serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can serve the Lord within one's mind, since the activities of the mind are as good as those of the other senses. This is called the non-dual or absolute situation, Advaya Gyan. People generally perform ritualistic ceremonies for the birth of a child. Why then should Vasudeva not have performed such a ceremony when the Supreme Lord appeared as his son? Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. And please forgive me for anything that I might say that is incorrect or not in line with Shastra. And please pray for me that I may be able to share Srimad Bhagavatam in line with our parampara and how they speak on these topics. And we can pray together. Om Jnanati Mirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurun Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Krishna Chaitanya Devam. Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Tinamine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare. So, thank you all once again for those who are arriving a bit late. I will read the translation once again. So, we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 3, Verse 11. And the verse says, when Vasudeva saw his extraordinary son, his eyes were struck with wonder. In transcendental jubilation, he mentally collected 10,000 cows and distributed them among the brahmanas as a transcendental festival. So we must remember the context. All of you are much more steady hearing Bhagavatam than I am. So I'm sure that you are all caught up with this context and you are very well aware of where in the Bhagavatam we are. We are dealing with the birth or the divine appearance of Sri Krishna in the prison of Kamsa, right? Devaki and Vasudeva are in the prison of Kamsa. And so what is being said here in the purport by Srila Prabhupada, and he has gotten this from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's purport of this same Bhagavatam, is that Vasudeva is struck with wonder. And he gives these 4 different aspects of wonder that Krishna was not afraid to appear in the prison house of Kamsa, where Vasudeva and Devaki were interned. That even though Sri Krishna is the divine Lord and the supreme transcendence and he is all-pervading, etc., he had appeared in the womb of Devaki. This is the second point of wonder. Third, that a child could take birth from the womb so nicely decorated with a full head of hair and all these beautiful arm bangles and all these beautiful decorations. So this was the third point of wonder. How could he appear so beautifully decorated? And finally, the last is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead was Vasudeva's worshipable deity. So how could Vasudeva's worshipable deity have taken birth as his own son? Yes, so these are the 4 aspects of wonder that are being spoken of here. But I would like to focus on the latter part of the verse and the latter part of the purport. These 4 aspects of wonder are extremely beautiful, and I'm sure that if I were more qualified, I'd be able to speak on them. But I'd like to speak on this latter part of the verse where it says that Vasudeva then mentally collected 10,000 cows and distributed them among the brahmanas as a transcendental festival. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport regarding this says that if one cannot externally serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then one can serve within one's mind, since the activities of the mind are as good as those of the other senses. So this is very beautiful. And I really wish I could do that. I wish that I could distribute 10,000 cows to the brahmanas in worship of Krishna. And I truly wish that I could offer Krishna so many beautiful prayers in my mind. However, I think we all know that it is very extremely, sometimes unimaginably difficult to do this, right? Sometimes the mind can feel chaotic, right? In Yoga Sutras, it says that the mind is full of these chitta vrittis, right? This constant fluctuations of the mind going up and down and left and right. In Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says that the mind is more difficult to control than the wind. And so this mind can sometimes be chaotic and it can sometimes be a mess. And so I found when I read this verse that the first feeling that I got is that it's a little bit confrontational in a sense. So it's not that I can mentally attend morning class from my bed if I'm able to attend, actually. Someone is saying in the comments, no, it is also good. You should be here attending from your bed. That is fine. But yes, as I was saying, I found this verse slightly confrontational, because if we are looking at these beautiful, right, we're reading this Bhagavatam and we're reading Krishna stories and we're learning about the saints and we're learning about Vasudeva and Devaki and we're learning about Mother Yashoda and Srinanda, because they are examples, they are archetypes, they are these beautiful saints, they represent these divine characteristics that we are actually meant to look up to, and therefore they are a guiding star, they are our North Star. However, it's also confronting because it reminds us of where we are not. And please forgive me in advance for getting a little heavy today, but it's coming from my heart and I'll try not to be so heavy. And so it's reminding me of where I am not, right? I am not at the level of Vasudeva. I am not able to offer tens of thousands of cows mentally to the brahmanas. I am not even able to chant my japa with a steady mind, right? And I'll use I statements. I can speak for myself. And so what's really being asked of us in this verse, in the later part of this verse, especially Srila Prabhupada saying, yes, it is just as good, but it is just as good if we're actually able to do it. So it begs us to ask the questions, is our mind controlled? And if it is not controlled, what are we doing to control it? And are we approaching our sadhana with an uncontrolled mind and just going through the motions of the practice? Are we checking out when we get into our sadhana? Yeah. Or are we sincerely trying to rectify the loose reins of the mind? I'll be a bit candid. There are a lot of devotee jokes. And I was telling someone, and I've heard this said many, many times, and we laugh because we know it's true. And so I was telling a devotee the other day that last week I have been getting very, very bad sleep. Very, very bad sleep because I've been traveling a lot. And so it's taken my body some time to ground back into being here in New York. And so I just haven't been able to sleep. And the devotee said, oh, you should just put on a lecture and then immediately you will fall asleep. And it was a joke, but we laugh because we know it's true. And I told another devotee and they said, oh, you should just put your hand in the japa bag and then you would just immediately fall asleep. And again, it's a joke, but we laugh because we know it's true. And the reason why it's tinged with this sense of humor, but also a self-deprecating humor, is because we know that we are not attentive when we are, approaching our sadhana, or we know that we are not as attentive as we could be, right? And so the reason that we are not attentive, or the reason that perhaps this attentiveness is leaving us, is because the mind is uncontrolled, because we are not at the level of Vasudeva, able to offer tens of thousands of cows to the brahmanas. I will keep reminding us of this, that we are not there. And so we hear this beautiful analogy in the Upanishads about this existence that we are in, or us, this psycho spiritual physical complex that we inhabit, that we are. The Upanishads is saying, like, this is like a chariot drawn by horses. And the horses represent the senses. The reins represent the mind. The driver of the chariot who is holding on to the reins represents the intelligence. The chariot itself is the body, and the passenger in the chariot is the soul. And so the idea is that if our intelligence is not in check, then the mind is uncontrolled and it will not be able to rein in the senses. And then our senses will chase after the sense objects and whatever they desire without control. And this is very counterintuitive to our current society, our material society that we live in, not our Krishna conscious society. But we have to be realistic. You know, we're living in New York City. For those of you who've come to Thursday Night Kirtan or who come to any program, in the program, you're in bliss. It's wonderful. You're chanting the Lord's holy names. And all of a sudden, you walk out into this material, very strong Thursday night, East Village material energy, and it's very in your face. And if the mind is not controlled by our intelligence, you know, I won't go there and say the possibilities of what could happen, but many things could happen, right? Many things could happen. Because the mind, we're reminded in Bhagavad Gita, can be the source of our, it can be the source of our, what's the word I'm looking for? Of our forward movement towards actually being Krishna conscious, or it can also be the source of our degradation. And this is something that we need to not take lightly. And that's why I said earlier, please forgive me for being a little heavy today. But I was listening to some heavy lectures that inspired this. And also sometimes heaviness is good. Sometimes I feel like it is a necessary reminder. I need that reminder sometimes, for sure, that the mind can sometimes help me. Yes, someone is writing, can take us forward in Krishna consciousness, can take us forward in our trajectory towards transcendence, if it is controlled by intelligence, if it is guided by Guru. We'll get into that a little bit later. Or it can be the source of our degradation. And so there is a verse in Bhagavad Gita where Sri Krishna himself is saying, this is chapter 6, verse 5, that one must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. And in the verse right after that is this very famous verse that when the mind is under the control of the self, it can be the best of friends. And when the mind is not under the control of the self, it can be the worst of enemies. But I'd like to read this purport by Srila Prabhupada about this chapter 6, verse 5 of Bhagavad Gita. It's very nice, so I'll read it. It's very short. And Srila Prabhupada is saying that the purpose of the yoga system is to control the mind and to draw it away from attachment to sense objects. It is stressed herein that the mind must be so trained that it can deliver the conditioned soul from the mire of nescience. I love this language, the mire of nescience. In material existence, one is subjected to the influence of the mind and the senses. In fact, the pure soul is entangled in the material world because the mind is involved with the false ego, which desires to lord it over material nature. Therefore, the mind should be trained so that it will not be attracted by the glitter of material nature. And in this way, the conditioned soul may be saved. One should not degrade oneself by attraction to sense objects. The more one is attracted by sense objects, the more one becomes entangled in material existence. The best way to disentangle oneself is to always engage the mind in Krishna consciousness. So this is a very beautiful purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada about the mind and how the mind can be trained, he is saying, to deliver us across this ocean, right? Oftentimes the material existence is referred to as this ocean of suffering, actually. And so when the mind is trained, it can go across this ocean of material nescience quite simply. However, when the mind is untrained, then it becomes like these wild horses in the analogy from the Upanishads. It becomes like these wild horses who are just uncontrolled, without reins, running desperately towards whatever they want, right? Whatever the senses are pulling them towards. And the thing about senses, and I'm not going to get so heavy into like, sense desires and control your sense desires. But the thing about senses, I was in Govardhan Eco Village in February, early February. And we had our group, we were leading a group there in the Bhakti Center, myself and Doyal Gauranga. And we had the pleasure and the honor of having his this wonderful Prabhu, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, speak to us about many things. He spoke to our group about many things. But one thing he was speaking to us about was kind of the science. He's such a scientist when he speaks, the science of impressions on the mind. And I'm going to butcher everything that he said, but essentially, in a nutshell, what he was saying was that when we perform an action, when we are doing something, when we are physically doing something, we're actually reinforcing this impression or this samskar, and therefore we're helplessly pulled the next time to do it again. And so really he was speaking a lot about like free will and choice and all of this stuff. And so there might be a choice for sure, like there is free will. However, our ability to choose can be bolstered towards Krishna consciousness, or it can be degraded towards the senses, depending on how we are showing up to those choices each time, essentially, right? Like, are we continuing the bad habits? Are we what's the word I'm looking for? Reinforcing those bad habits, right? And we all have our bad habits. And again, this is a place not to like feel bad or feel ashamed of or any of those things. We'll get to that later. But simply my proposal right now is to understand the mind, right? We must understand that the mind is a tool. We are not the mind, right? The mind is not who we are. The mind is a tool that is controlled by the intelligence. And therefore, the question that we must answer is, well, where is this intelligence coming from? And how do we protect our intelligence so that we can control the mind, so that we are not helplessly taken away by the senses and the desires of the senses? I'll get to this verse later. Oh, no. This is the verse that I wanted to speak on now. This is one of my favorite verses from Srimad Bhagavatam. It's Canto 11, chapter 20, question mark, verse 7. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Canto 11, chapter 20, verse 7. It's either that or chapter 2, verse 70. I always do that. And so this verse says, Nrideham adyam sulabam sudurlabam plavam sukalpam gurukarna dharam maya nukulena nabasvataritam puman bhavabdim natarit sa atma ha. And this verse says, the human body, which can be awarded all benefit in life, is automatically obtained by the laws of nature, although it is a very rare achievement. The human body can be compared to a perfectly constructed boat, having the spiritual master as the captain and the instructions of the personality of Godhead as the favorable winds, impelling it on its course. Considering all these advantages, a human being who does not utilize this human life to cross the ocean of material existence must be considered to be the killer of his own soul. And I very much like this verse because it is reminding us that we are helpless, actually. We are quite in a helpless condition. I remember when I was living in the ashram, for anyone who's ever lived in an ashram or lived in a spiritual community, it's still hard. You know, spiritual life is hard. However, it's much less hard because you have the camaraderie of your fellow ashramites and the energy or the vibrations, the gunas are felt much less because you're surrounded by people who are sincerely trying to practice Krishna consciousness. And so I remember when I was moving out of the ashram, I was considering whether I should have a roommate or not. And I was really veering towards not having a roommate and just living alone. And one of my dear friends, who will remain unnamed, but lived in the ashram with me, one of my dear friends was like, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want to live alone?" I was like, "Why?" You know, I was kind of very innocently just like, "Are you sure it will be fine?" I was like, I'm good, you know, I'm great. I have control over my mind, you know, everything's fine. And he said, "I don't know about you, but when I'm alone in a room with the door closed, I cannot trust my mind." And that hit me so hard because it made me realize how I was even still a little naive, you know, and I do live alone now, but that's because you know, I'm getting married, and that's a whole nother thing. So I have to live alone. Technical issue. But I definitely feel that warning from my fellow ashramite like very much rung true. You know, when we are alone, when we are not with and alone can be both a physical alone and even more so for me at that time a spiritual perhaps emotional sense of aloneness, right? Because we can be physically alone but have the instructions of our guru extremely present in our heart, but that takes a lifetime of sincere devotional service. And so back to this verse, because it's a very important verse that I wanted to share about this human condition that we are in. It is saying that actually this human body is quite a rare achievement. And actually, it's like this perfectly constructed boat that can take us to transcendence. It can take us back to Godhead. It can take us to Krishna. And this is a very important point because I think, you know, I've heard sometimes the rhetoric, or I've definitely heard this before, and I think we hear it in our Krishna conscious circles of like, you know, the body is bad and the mind is evil and this is not good, and the, you know, this kind of moralizing. And I really love Bhagavad Gita and Sri Krishna's words because he gives both aspects. There's no moralizing. He says, yes, the mind can be your best friend and it can also be your worst enemy, right? He's being very realistic and very scientific in a sense. And this moralizing also coming from a Judeo-Christian understanding. I won't get too much into that, but I'll speak from myself personally. I was very much brought up in that tradition. You know, there's a lot of like original sin and the body is bad and, you know, it's all evil and, you know, hell and heaven, all this kind of stuff. And here we're actually being told, actually, the body is a very rare achievement. And actually, the mind can be your best friend. And actually, by listening to superior instruction, you can cross over this material existence, right? But the caveat then is listening to that higher instruction, right? So poetically in the verse, it's saying that the spiritual master is the captain, and the instructions of the personality of Godhead are the winds impelling the boat on its course. I've read another translation of this verse that I really like, and it says that the winds are the favorable winds that are pushing the boat on its course are the winds of remembrance of Krishna's names. And I thought that that's so beautiful and poetic. I'm going to pause and just look at the chat because I feel Ananda Bihari is saying some nice things. When you're alone, the danger comes from your phone. Yes. Thank you for saying this, Ananda Bihari Prabhu, because I didn't want to get so hard on people, but thank you for keeping it real. When you are alone, the danger indeed comes from your phone. Yeah, it's really intense. We don't need to get so much into this because we all know. But the danger indeed does come from your phone when you are alone. I love the rhymes. So back to this verse. Yes, so remembrance of Krishna's names. The guru is the captain of the boat. But this verse, it elicited some questions for me, and I realized that I'm running out of time. Wow. And I have some stories to tell. So I'll go through this rather quickly. This verse elicited some questions for me that were, how often are we actually thinking of our body or of our, physical existence as this perfectly constructed boat, right? So we have to maintain this boat. We have to maintain this body. We have to maintain this mind, right? And so are we feeding the body and the mind with things that are further going to exacerbate or further going to disturb? There are things out there in the world that are disturbing. There are things that we watch that can be disturbing and affect us on a very deep level. So are we feeding the body and the mind with those things, or are we feeding the body and the mind with favorable things? It says that we must take surrender of the captain of the boat, who is the guru. So it begs us to ask, how much are we surrendering to the instructions of the spiritual master? This is a very, beautiful reminder. How much are we hearing our spiritual masters? How much are we surrendering to their instructions? And yes, I said about this version of the translation of the verse that speaks about the winds being remembrance of Krishna's names. So how much are we actually remembering Krishna's names? This is also a nice question, right? And so we have to realize that we have such an amazing opportunity. That's what I'm taking away from this verse. We have an amazing opportunity in this human lifetime, right? In this human life form. And so the question is, are we taking it? Are we utilizing it? Are we utilizing it to our full advantage? Are we actually following the instructions as delineated in Shastra? Because the final line of this verse is kind of intense and also a wonderful warning that if we are not doing this, if we are not utilizing this human life form to cross over the ocean of material existence, then we are considered sa atmaha, or the killer of our own souls. So Vasudev, going back to the verse, can easily offer these tens of thousands of cows to the Lord because of his exalted status. There are all these stories about who Vasudev was in past lives and all the austerities that him and Devaki had to do for Sri Krishna to take birth from them. And so we must remember that our position is not that, right? Our position is not that. Because the problem, right, when you read something like this or when you hear something like this, the problem is that there might be a tendency to jump towards, oh yes, I don't have to chant my japa today because I can just chant my japa in my mind. I don't, right? Or, I don't need to offer bhoga to Krishna because actually I can just offer food stuff to Krishna in my mind. And though I don't need to do any prayers or any bhajans for Krishna externally with my voice, because I can just do it in my mind. It says it there in Srimad Bhagavatam. I don't need to do it. And so this is not the mood. This is not the correct understanding. This is not the correct mood, right? These externals exist for a reason, right? Our sadhana exists for a reason. The ritual aspect, Vaidhi Bhakti, which we don't need to get into so much, but this kind of step-by-step process, which is laid out to us, in all these different Srimad Bhagavatam and all these beautiful literatures by the six Goswamis, it's all there for us. So we should never, ever feel like I can just jump towards the level of any of these beautiful inhabitants of Vraj or of Mathura, right? Of Krishna's Leela, of Vasudev. Because this is not it, right? We are just simply not at this level. And it is actually humbling to understand that. It is humbling to know that. It is humbling to say that. Because when we understand that, then we are able to take shelter of the Guru and take shelter of the spiritual master. However, this leads us into a bit of a tiffy. I'm going to use that word, like a little bit of a uncomfortable place, because what tends to happen is that there is a feeling that everyone should be following all of the rules all of the times, and if you break one tiny rule, then you are evil, or you are wrong and you should be ousted or whatever, right? Whatever the thought process is. And then the other side of it is that, oh no, these rules are whatever, they're guidelines, they're not rules. And I can offer stuff to Krishna in my mind. I don't need to chant. I don't need to chant rounds, right? And so these two extremes are actually spoken about in Nectar of Instruction. And it's important to understand this because when we are on either extreme, we are not in the correct mood. We are not in the correct understanding, right? This is called niyama agraha and niyama agraha, right? So the first is holding on too tightly to the rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement. And the other is kind of throwing out the baby in the bathwater, as we say, right? Kind of just being a little bit whimsical or flippant or acting independently of the rules and regulations. And so the first one is quite dangerous because if we get very kind of like rule oriented, then criticism can start, right? Like they're not following the rules. They came into the temple, they didn't bow. They're a bad devotee, like the mind goes in this place. And this is a very nice exercise, actually, in understanding the reins of the mind, because the intelligence needs to be held onto them and the intelligence needs to be properly situated, right? So our intelligence needs to understand these basic concepts, niyama agraha, niyama agraha, right? I'm not following these rules just for the sake of being perfect, right? I actually want to develop my Krishna consciousness. And at the same time, I'm not throwing the rules out and I'm not acting independently or whimsically because I know that I have to take shelter of my spiritual master. And I know that I don't know it all, right? If you think that you know it all, then this is simply the false ego. If you think that you know better than your spiritual master, then this is not good. Right? This is not a good place to be, actually, right? That is not the correct mood, right? We want to understand that it is a humble mood that we need to approach. Yes, trinadapi sunichena kadoravi sahishana. So the last thing I will share before we open it up for questions is a story, because I always like to have a little story, a story time. I was listening to a lecture by His Holiness Radhanath Swami, and he was recounting a story about Srila Prabhupada. And I really love this story because it speaks a little bit towards how to conquer the mind and how to conquer the material senses and the material platform, right? Because just to give the quickest summary of what I've been speaking up till now is that Vasudeva is on a different platform than us, and he in his mind can offer tens of thousands of cows to the Brahmanas, and we cannot, right? This is the simple point that I'm making, and we cannot. And the reason we cannot, I've expounded on all of the reasons as to why the mind is uncontrolled and etc. and as such. However, we come to this point of niyama agraha, the rules and regulations, and perhaps getting a little too hard on ourselves. Oh, these are the rules. Oh, you must follow them. Oh, wicked mind, like this. And we can also receive this criticism from others, right? Or we are our ones ourselves giving that criticism. Oh, look at them. They're so uncontrolled. Oh, they forgot to, I don't know. They forgot to bow when they walked into the temple. They're uncontrolled, right? So this beautiful story, Srila Prabhupada. Let us see. On Raganuga Bhakti. Now is not the time to speak on Raganuga Bhakti. I feel like perhaps I would like to speak on Raganuga, but we have 3 minutes. But essentially, I guess what I will say in Raganuga Bhakti, spontaneous loving devotion to the Lord, is that we are not at that level. That is all I have to say. We are not there. And therefore, Vaidhi Bhakti is there for a reason. Therefore, the rules and regulations are there for a reason. Therefore, I must chant my 16 rounds. Therefore, I must listen nicely. Therefore, there are certain steps that I must take to get to that place, right? That is all I will say about that. So, story about Srila Prabhupada and how to conquer the mind, how to conquer the material platform. So, this is a story of a lady in New York who was coming to the temple and who was interested in devotional life. And she would always wear many, many cosmetics and have all these lavish hairstyles. And all the devotees would criticize her. And they would say, this is the bodily concept of life. This is the material platform. You are wasting your life. You are spending so much money on your hair and on your cosmetics. This is nonsense. This is useless. And she was extremely, as one would be, discouraged. She was extremely discouraged. And she felt, God, these Hare Krishna people are just harassing me. They're just telling me all these awful things about myself. And she felt, I'm never coming back here. I am never coming back to this Hare Krishna movement, to this temple. I am not coming back here. And then Srila Prabhupada came to the temple. And so she felt, okay, I will go and see their guru, and I will go see what he has to say. But then I will never come back, because she felt discouraged. She felt defamed. She felt, criticized. But she said internally, something in her said, I will go meet their guru and I will see. And so she went to Prabhupada's room. And the first thing that Srila Prabhupada said to her was, oh, you are looking so very beautiful. And your hair is so nice. And how nicely do you decorate yourself? I'm very, very pleased to see your beauty. And so when she heard this from Srila Prabhupada, her heart was completely melted, because she knew that she was on the bodily concept of life, and she knew that she was on the material platform. But when she saw that Srila Prabhupada so lovingly treated her like this, then she had a complete transformation, because she saw that someone was meeting her with love. And so the next day, she had complete transformation. She combed down her hair, she put on a sari, she surrendered, she moved into the temple bus, like this, right? And like that.
Did she shave up?
Huh?
Did she shave up?
No, she didn't shave up. She just let her hair down. I feel like that would have been too drastic of a change. But this mood, and I'd like to end with this mood, is that Prabhupada was not self-righteous. He was motivated by love only. He was the ever well-wisher of everyone, right? Srila Prabhupada, we know, would end all of his letters like this. He would sign, you're ever well-wisher. And so Srila Prabhupada, and I could speak so much about Srila Prabhupada and his stories, but we have limited time. But the main point that I'm trying to make here is that he approached this situation with love. With love. Not, look at you, you're on the material concept of life. Oh, your mind is so uncontrolled. Oh, like this. Oh, like that. No, right? He was approaching this situation and this person with love. And because he was able to do that, then her heart was able to melt and she was able to surrender. And so therefore, we should not be self-righteous in our sadhana, right? We should not be criticizing others. And also, that criticism can go towards others, criticizing others, but also criticizing ourselves. I'm someone, I can speak for myself. I'm someone that I tend to be quite hard on myself. Oh God, my sadhana is terrible. Oh, this is awful. I'm not doing anything right. Like, what's wrong with me? Why aren't I making advancement? Why, I tend to be like this on myself, and I tend to measure myself up to quite perfect standards. I have this thing that I like to be perfect. And I remember when I first moved into the ashram, I wanted to be perfect. My dhoti perfect, my kurta perfect, my tilak, everything perfect. And so this is not the mood. This is also not the mood, because there's no perfection in this material life. In this material platform, there's no perfection. And actually, the perfection lies in our surrender to Krishna, and our surrender to Guru, and our surrender to following their instructions nicely. And so Vasudev, going back to the verse, and I'll end here, is able to make all of these offerings to Krishna because he loves Krishna. He loves Krishna from the deepest part of his heart. And so he is able to give all of these beautiful offerings in his mind. And so I wanted to end on this sweeter point of love, because it begs us to ask the question of, where is our love? How is our love to Krishna manifest? Are we just going through the motions of our quote unquote Krishna consciousness or spiritual practices? Or is there actual love in our heart for Krishna? Because when there is actual love in our heart, then we can start to pray in our minds, right? Then we can start to really feel, and this is very personal. This is very esoteric. This is a very, very personal thing. And so therefore, no one should be going to you saying, oh, I don't believe that you feel Krishna in your heart. If someone says that to you, I don't know, unless it's your guru, please, you can just respect them and say, okay, thank you, Haribol, and walk the other direction. Because this is a very personal thing about feeling Krishna in your heart and like this. But I guess I'll end with this point of to arrive to that place, and this is the path of bhakti, to arrive to that place, we have to have actual love, right? And that is the goal of our entire bhakti, yes? Actual, real devotional love. And it is a very long process to arrive there, and therefore we should not jump the process. We should not jump the process and say, oh yes, Vasudeva can offer 10,000 cows in his mind to Krishna, so can I, right? This is not the correct mood. We must humble ourselves before our spiritual masters, before our other teachers, our shiksha gurus, and we must take shelter. And we must keep hearing, and that love in our heart will manifest in this way. Haribol. Hare Krishna. Thank you all for tolerating me. And I'll open it up for questions.
Beautiful class. Kishor Chandra, unbelievably beautiful class. I just wanted to quickly share one little anecdote from Srila Prabhupada on how to conquer the mind. Srila Prabhupada was once asked by his disciple, Srila Prabhupada, how do we conquer our mind? Srila Prabhupada answered it in a very Prabhupada-like way. He said two words, he said. Can anyone guess what those two words were? Srila Prabhupada, how to control the mind? Think like Prabhupada. Jamuna Jaya, think like Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, no, very close, very close. Chant more, very close. It was it's okay. Let me start giving it away. It's as a verb, and yeah, it has a verb. It starts with a verb. How to control your mind? It's a negative answer.
In Bhagavad Gita?
No. I mean, it's a correct answer, but what Srila Prabhupada said was ignore it. Just to add to all the beautiful points that Kishor Chandra Prabhu made. So wonderful. Thank you very much. So let's quiz him. If you have difficult questions, challenge Kishor Chandra. He's prepared. He's Shastrik, he's got tilak on, he's got chadar on, he can handle it. Adipurusha Prabhu is whispering something in the phone, but he's muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, in the Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, by constant practice and by detachment, like you said, ignore it. By constant practice and by detachment, understanding I'm not this mind, and I must practice. We're trying, right?
Yes, thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Kishor Chandra. Wonderful class.
I just want.
Oh, go ahead, Bhima Prabhu. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to thank you for a great class. And it came to me like in the Western religion, we say, don't judge, ye be judged. Or as Jesus said, whoever's without sin, throw the first stone. So I really enjoyed hearing you about avoiding both extremes. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
I was just quickly going to say there's 2 points that when you were speaking about the mind, I put in the chat something that Jai Jagannath always said that just always stuck with me. He always said, treat your mind like a bad neighborhood. Like, or I always think like a house in a scary movie when you're in the movie theater saying, don't go in, and we go in. Or don't go in alone. I always had the don't go alone. Take Guru and Shastra's instruction with you. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is that your story about Prabhupada, Angelika gave class yesterday, and we heard how beautifully she was welcomed in by our Shampak. The reason she got here was not by someone saying what those devotees did. She really unpacked for us just this importance of us not thinking that we're all that in the bag of chips, and to welcome everyone in. So it was such a nice contrast for hearing from those devotees and what Shampak did and what Srila Prabhupada really wants us to do. So thank you so much for class.
Thank you, Jamuna Jaya. And yes, Jai Jagannath was the friend that I was talking about who told me not to go alone.
I thought so. I thought so.
Like this. Yes. And yes, this is something that is very, I'll speak to this. This is something that is very important. You know, I met the devotees when I was 21 years old. But I didn't take to Krishna consciousness seriously until I was 25. And that is because, well, we don't need to get into that whole story. That's a story for a different time. But the mood of the devotees at the Bhakti Center is very specific, and it's extremely full of love, and it's extremely meeting you where you're at, and you never feel, or I never felt a sense of we're on this better platform than you are, and you're, whatever, you're this. It was always unconditional, non-judgmental love. And that is so, so, so important, and it's testament to that, when you go to our programs, when you go to Thursday night kirtan, it's one of the only places in New York City where you can see people from different faiths, different races, different sexes, different sexualities, all the different things, right? All the different things. And they're somehow or another, they've come together. Me and Doyal Guranga always ask each other, where are these people coming from? Where are they coming from? Who are these amazing, beautiful people that have descended here? And, so it's really, really speaks to that inclusive mood Andrea is saying of the Bhakti Center. Yes.
Hare Krishna, Kishor Chandra Das Prabhu. I had 2 questions that I put in the chat. The first one was, Could you tell me what's that Bhagavad Gita verse that you quoted that says that the mind is your friend or your enemy?
This is Bhagavad Gita chapter 6, verse 6.
6?
Yes, I believe so.
Oh, okay. And then also I was wondering, is the story told, I'm assuming, because I think I heard it differently, is that different than the story that I had heard about the lady that had the beehive and that she would always wear her hair in a beehive, but that Prabhupada accepted her? She was able to do like her initiation even with the beehive, and he was just like, you don't have to change your clothes, you can just continue that way?
It might be, I'm not sure. The way I told the story was how I heard it in the lecture from Radhanath Swami.
Oh, okay, so it's probably a different person. So then in that case, I want to share, what you shared made me think of that story, because I had heard the story of this lady who always wore her hair in a beehive, and how other people thought like, oh, that's like not good, like you should put your hair down and like put it in a braid and like be like Indian style. And Prabhupada had no problem like accepting her with her beehive and with her like Western dress for her to, be initiated, and he didn't feel like she had to change anything. So again, it's that same theme that Srila Prabhupada accepted people where they were, and he wanted to bring them to Krishna consciousness with love. And that's why I put like with honey instead of vinegar. Like you can attract so much more with honey than with vinegar. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And this really makes me think of Srila Prabhupada and my spiritual teacher as well, that there is a mood on the Vyasasan and there is a mood off of the Vyasasan. And this is a very important thing to know, right? That when you're on Vyasasan, you're representing the Shastra, and you must speak what it is being said, right? And there are parts of our scripture that are really intense, that are really confronting. I remember when I first was going through like the end of the third canto, for me was like, whoa, this is super intense. And so there are parts of our literature of our scripture that are really confronting and intense, and we have to present them in that way, like we can't sugarcoat things. And that's what I was feeling a little bit in today's class. I was like, I can't sugarcoat this. However, the way that Srila Prabhupada is, the way that my spiritual teacher is, the way that so many of the devotees in the Bhakti Center is that we are I'm sitting on a Vyasasan, you just can't see it. Is that we're approaching our friends, the people in our community with love, non-judgmental compassion, with meeting people where they're at. This is the example that Srila Prabhupada gave, and therefore we must follow that example.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I also forgot that I wanted to congratulate you on your upcoming wedding, and that I am wishing you many, 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 many blessings, that you can partner up and help each other in your spiritual path.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrea. Any more questions, comments, challenges?
Several people this week, Hare Krishna, several devotees this week have mentioned what happens when, like you mentioned today, you're going outside of the temple onto First Avenue, and what you see there and what people are doing there and how you respond to that. And my own impression is that I'm not, it's a tendency to think, oh, they're eating meat, they're drinking, they're smoking, they're doing all kinds of promiscuous things. But the point is, Krishna is working in everyone's life. Maybe not the way I would think he would do it, or at the rate I would think he'd do it. In his own time, I think my impression is that Krishna is giving everybody what they need at the point of development they're in, because there are developmental stages. And therefore, it's perfect, and we don't have to compare ourselves to anyone else, much less think ourselves better than anyone. As soon as even the gopis thought they were better than anyone, Krishna left them, right? So, Yudhisthira was thinking, I couldn't find anyone worse than me, right? And the Mahabhagavad is thinking like that everyone else here is much closer to Krishna than I am. Even Radharani is bringing a new devotee and saying, Krishna, this girl, she loves you so much more than I do. Please give her your attention.
Thank you so much, Adi Purush Prabhu.
Of course.
you so much, Adi Purush Prabhu. Yeah, this is the point, right? That we are not placing ourselves above any other, and also the point is to understand that if the mind is not controlled by the intelligence being ruled over by the instructions of the spiritual master, of the scripture, then it is actually, and I guess this is more the point that I'm trying to make. It is very easy for our mind to do that. It is very easy for our mind to place ourselves above others. It is very easy for our mind to become uncontrolled. It is extremely easy for us to walk out onto First Avenue and be like, look at all these heathens, I'm just, like, maybe not so dramatic, but there's a tinge of that, right? And therefore, the point that Adi Purush Prabhu is making is so pertinent, it's so powerful, right? That as soon as the gopis thought that they were better, Krishna disappeared, right? Like this. And therefore criticism and aligning ourselves with that false ego, thinking that we are lording ourselves, lording over this purport that I read quickly, and I wasn't able to get into it so much, but this purport of Bhagavad Gita chapter 6 verse 5, there was this one line that says that the pure soul is entangled in the material world because the mind is involved with the false ego, which desires to lord it over material nature, right? So this idea that I am the Lord, I am the God, I am the one, right? I am the best, it's me. This is what's going to get us into trouble. And when the mind is commingling with the false ego, and that is going to move us in that direction. And I guess that the warning that I want to leave everyone off of is that it happens more often than not. Okay, I think time for class is over. The conch shell, I got conch shelled out, but it happens more often than not. And we must be wary of it, right? I don't know if I have to go now because of the conch shell.
Thank you very much. Kishor Chandra Prabhu Ki Jai. His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj, Kishor Chandra's Guru, Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Yeah, don't be alone. Be with your Guru. Like Srila Prabhupada, he always said, I'm not alone, I'm with my Guru. Right, Kishor Chandra Prabhu. Thank you very much. Beautiful class. Shastrik, funny, has stories. Beautiful response from the people. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Angel, Akiko-chan, Narayani Dasi, Keshava Anderson, Adipurusha Prabhu, Suzanne, Pat, Angelika. Who else? Yogeshwari. Hemangi's back. My God, Hemangi, welcome back. We missed you. Isabel, Spirit Soul, Hare Krishna. Arjuna Prabhu, Bhima Prabhu, Janakeli Prabhu. Beautiful, beautiful people. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.